Hey, this is Ed Ferrari from Foundry, and I was recently asked if there was an easy way to create a tapering spring effect. And there is. There's actually two ways. One is a really easy way, and the other is just pretty easy. So we'll explore both. First, we'll cover the easiest way. So I'm going to name this empty mesh item spring underscore geometry, or spring underscore geo, and then I'm going to hold control and create a unit cube. All I really need is one polygon from this cube, so I'll press 3 for polygons mode. I'll select the top polygon, open square bracket to select the inverse, and then Control X to cut that away. And then I'll select this polygon and center selected all. And then I'm going to press Shift D to subdivide this, and the subdivision method will be Capmo Clark. I'll click OK. And then I'm just going to bevel this, so B for bevel, and then I'll grab the red handle to inset this, like so. 2 for edges mode, I'll double click this edge to select the loop, and then I'll come over to the deform vertical tab and I'll click radial. And then I'll right click in the viewport just to set this to be a little bit more circular, so that when I press Shift Tab to go into Capmo Clark mode, we have a nice circular geometry. So 3 for polygons mode, I'll just double click to select all of the polygons, R for scale, and I'm just going to scale this in until it's quite small. So that looks good to me. Q to drop the scale tool, escape to drop the polygon selection, and now we need our spring. So we're going to use a curve, and we're actually going to use a preset that ships with Modo. So I'll press F6 to bring up my preset browser, and then I will, I already have it loaded up right here, the spiral curve. If you don't see this, you might have to come over to your directory section. And one quick tip, if you don't see your folders in the right side here, you can always come over to your gear icon and change folders as thumbnails from never to always, and then you'll see your folders here. So I'm going to click on assets and then assemblies, and then in aliases we want to click on the mesh operations folder, and that's how you get to your spiral curve. So I'm not going to just double click on the spiral curve. I'm actually going to create a new mesh item first. So N for new mesh item, and then I'll name this spring underscore curve. And then within this empty mesh item, I'm going to double click my spiral curve assembly. Okay, so now I can just press F6 to close the preset browser. And then I'm going to navigate over to the Mesh Operations tab, because you'll notice that this spring curve is actually a procedural mesh. It actually has the gear icon, which is a clear indicator that it's procedural. So in the Mesh Operations tab, we have these two panels here. The top panel is the items list, and the bottom panel here is the procedural stack. This is where all of our mesh operations are going to exist. So here's the spiral curve mesh op. We have these nice properties that we can adjust. I'm just going to straight away set the axis to Y, and you'll see the spring here is now aligned to the Y. If I click on the taper channel and then hold Control and click on the twist per unit meter or twist per meter channel, and then click on length and point spacing, and then press 5 to go into items mode, and then press C for the channel hall, we get the channel hall floating window here. And this is just a nice way to adjust our properties on the fly. So the first thing I'll do is increase the twist per meter. So I'll left mouse button click and drag on it to increase the spiral amount. And then I will change the length so it's a little bit shorter. And then I'm going to adjust the taper to about 80%. And then I'll give this some more twisting. So I'm increasing the twist per meter. And you'll notice that it's no longer circular, and that's because we don't have enough points on this curve. So if I hold Control 1 to bring up my main pie menu and choose Toggle Verts, you'll notice our points along the curve are spread out pretty sparsely. So there's not enough points. That's where the point spacing comes in. If I decrease this number, there's more points. So now that it's at 10 millimeters, we have a point every 10 millimeters along the curve. Previously it was at 50. So the more, if you want more points, you have to decrease the point spacing. So I think 10 is a 10 or 5 or somewhere in between works pretty well. I think 10 works perfectly. Okay, so now I'll hold Control 1 to bring up my main pie menu and just toggle off the verts. I'm going to return to my spring geometry. So I pressed 5 to go into items mode, and I selected my geometry. And you'll notice that the spring geo is not procedural, but we're going to make it procedural by adding a curve extrude mesh operation. So in the mesh ops area, I'm going to click add operator, and then I'll just start typing in curve extrude, and that filters out everything else. So all we see is the curve extrude mesh op. I'll double click on this. It will ask us for a path, so I'll just click on spring curve and click OK. And you can see something is starting to happen, but it's not looking great quite yet. So I'm going to change my selection type from edge to polygon in my sweep effector properties. And this is a property of the curve extrude mesh op. So I'll just change that from edge to polygon. So it's looking a little bit better. I'm going to enable curve cage. And then I'm going to click on the little arrow next to curve extrude to expand the tool pipe, and then I'm going to click on the arrow next to tool pipe to expand the to expose the path segment generator. Here I can increase the steps, so it's set to 24. I can change it to 64, and then it's starting to look a little bit better. I can increase that to 128, and it's looking even better. And I think 128 is pretty good. Let me actually do double that, so we'll do 256. So now it's even more dense, but it's looking pretty good. So back in the spring geometry, or I'm sorry, back in the curve extrude sweep effector properties, we can toggle off the cap start and cap end, and that just keeps them kind of open. But I'll leave them on. I'll leave them enabled, so we have caps. Now what's nice is if I come down to the base mesh, the actual sweep effect becomes blue. It's kind of, this is ghosted mode. So if I turn that off, we can see the effect. This button right here toggles ghosted mode. But what's nice is in the base mesh, I can start to adjust the original geometry. So if I press 3 for polygons mode, R for scale, and I start scaling this inwards, we can see the spring becoming a little bit more narrow. Also, if I press 2 for edges mode, and I double click the edge right here to select the loop, and then come over to the deform side tab and click on radial and change the mode from circle to n-sided, and then I set a side of 4 and then click in the viewport, and then let's see, press shift tab to go out of Catmull-Clark sub D mode, and then click off of the base mesh by holding control and clicking on the base mesh. You can see our spiral is now square. So there's a whole lot that you can do with this, and I can even return to the spring curve. And in the spiral curve mesh operation, we can once again click on taper, hold control and click on twist per meter, as well as point spacing and length. And then if I press 5 for items mode and C for the channel haul, we can update this manually so that I can change the twisting. I can change the taper, so we can make it flare towards the top. So you'll notice there are limits. If I go too low to the point where the tip can no longer kind of become more narrow, it will kind of collapse in on itself, but it doesn't really break. It just turns into a straight curve at the top. So that's actually pretty interesting. So I'll just twist that back. We can change the length so I can make it kind of climb up. So it's pretty robust. And it's just available to everybody with, I believe it was introduced in Modo 10 or 10.2. So if you press F6 for the preset browser, here it is right here, the spiral curve. So now let's build this the slightly less easier, but still pretty easy way. I'm going to come over to the basic vertical tab, and I'm going to click on my B-spline tool. If you don't see your B-spline tool, you might have to left mouse button click and hold on it. So you have your curve options, and then you'll just choose B-spline. I'll press Control Spacebar to bring up my Views pie menu, and I'll choose a front view. And then I'm going to turn snapping on with options. So I'll hold Alt and click on the snapping button. I'm going to turn snapping on by pressing this snapping button, and then I'm going to make sure grid mode is enabled and vertex mode is off. And then I'll just drag the snapping popover form over here just so it kind of hovers within our viewport. Now within this empty mesh layer, I'm going to start drawing my B-spline curve. So let's see, I will zoom in a little bit, and then I'll start my first curve here, and then I'll make a curve here, and I'm just going to make 5 points that are evenly spaced. So Q to drop the B-spline tool, I'll disable snapping, and I'll just return this to its default properties and then close the popover. Control spacebar to bring back the views pie menu, perspective view, and then I just want to center this curve. So in the basic side tab, I'll choose center selected. Oh, I can't do this in items mode, so I'll come over to polygons mode, center selected all. And now our curve is in the center, or the zero space in world space. So if I press W for move, I'm going to move this in the x-axis, so in negative an x to about right here. That's pretty good for me. Now this little circle at the top means that this is the beginning of the curve. For what we're doing, it doesn't really matter, but I'd like to have the curve begin at the bottom. And the reason it's beginning at the top is because I drew the curve from top to bottom. If I wanted the beginning of the curve to be at the bottom, I could have just started at the bottom and drew the 5 points from bottom to top. But if you want to change it at this point, you can just press F to flip, and now you'll notice the circle is at the bottom. So it's just a little tip. Now if I press Control 1 to bring up my main pie menu and choose Toggle Verts, you can see we have the 5 points that make up the B-spline. If I want to increase this, I can press 3 for polygons mode and then Shift D, and I can just subdivide the polygons. And Catmull-Clark mode is fine, so I'll click OK. And now we have 9 vertices if you look over in the bottom right corner at the information HUD. And again, I can subdivide this some more because we're going to need more resolution to support the spiral. So Shift D, and we might as well do this again, Shift D. So there we go. Now I'm going to add a vortex effector. So first I'll name this, I'll call this mesh spring underscore curve, and then I'll come over to the mesh operations tab and I'll add an operator. I'll choose vortex effector, and I'm just going to resize and reposition this vortex effector. So W for the move tool, and I'll just drag this down, and then R for the scale tool, and I'll just scale it in the X, Z, or X, Z axes. And that's looking pretty good. You'll see that the vortex effector is, the boundary of the vortex effector is sitting just outside the curve that we have here. So Q to drop the scale tool, and then I'm going to expand the vortex general influence so we can see the vortex effector, which I'll click. And then here we have twist per unit and taper. So I'll just select both of those, and then 5 for items mode and C for the channel hall. And I'm just going to start tapering this. So left mouse button click to taper, and then I'm going to start twisting. So I'll left mouse button click on twist and just start dragging this. And if we look closely on the inside here, the curve is indeed twisting. So we're getting that spiral effect. Now from a top view, it's still circular, but I can see that it's starting to kind of we're getting this kind of warbling effect. So I'm going to increase the density once again. So 3 for polygons mode, Shift D for Catmull-Clark subdivision, and we'll just click OK. And now it's maintaining its circular shape a little bit better. So now we need geometry to kind of sweep along this spiral. So I'll press N for a new mesh item. I'll just really quickly name this spring underscore geo. And then within this spring geo empty mesh, we'll just once again create a unit cube. So Control, click on the cube icon. I don't need to see the vertices, so Control 1 for the main pie menu, toggle verts. 3 for polygons mode, click on the top polygon, open square bracket, Control X to cut the rest away. With this polygon selected, we'll center selected on all. R for the scale tool, and we'll just scale this in. And then Shift D to subdivide this in Catmull-Clark sub-D mode. B for bevel, and then I'll grab the red handle to inset this. 2 for edges mode, double click that one edge to select the loop. Come over to the deform, V tab, radial, and click in the viewport. And we still had n-sided on, so let's change that to circle. There we go, that's looking good. Okay, Shift tab to go into Catmull-Clark sub-D mode. And then with this spring geometry selected, or the circular geometry that's going to make up the actual spring geometry, I will come over to the add operator section of the procedural stack, and I will create a curve extrude mesh operation. It's going to ask us for a path. I'll just choose the spring curve and click OK. And now we can see it's sort of working, but it's struggling because it doesn't have enough steps, or it doesn't have enough geometry to support it. So I'm going to change the selection type in the sweep effector from edge to polygon, and then you'll see that it's kind of flipped. So there's an option here to invert the polygons. And now to give this more steps or more resolution, I need to get to the actual path segment generator, which is inside the curve extrude. So I'll click on that, and we can just change the steps to, let's say, 64, maybe 128, and I think we'll be cool with that. So now I can come over to the base mesh and once again select the polygons, R for scale, and we can just scale this like so. And what's nice is if I come over to the vortex effector, we can just once again click on twist per unit, hold control, and choose the taper per unit, and then press 5 for items mode, C for the channel hall, and once again we can change the taper. So it's totally interactive. Once you're done, if you have geometry that you like and you no longer want it to be procedural, you can either right-click on the procedural geometry and choose Freeze Mesh Operations Freeze, or alternatively, you can just select the polygons of the procedural mesh. Oops, let me just make sure I'm at the top of the stack. So I can select these polygons, Control C, N for a new mesh item, Control V, and here you have the polygons that are non-procedural. So you can do something like Control E for the bend tool, and then you can just move the bend tool over here, change the axis, and you can bend this. So there's a lot that you can do with this. Now, the eagle-eyed observers among you might have noticed that the destructive bend tool, because I didn't have it perfectly centered and I did it a little bit haphazardly, created this pinching here, and the actual bend is creating kind of a smaller spiral here, and it's just a little bit uneven. So there are a couple things that we can do. I can just delete this mesh, and I can return to the spring curve, and above the vortex effector I can add a bend effector, and then I can just press W to move, and I can move this bend effector so it starts at the bottom of the spiral, and then I can increase the length by clicking the length channel, C for channel hall, and then just sliding this until it's roughly the same size as the spiral. And then I'll click on angle, and in the channel hall I'll just bend this so we get a bend. And now you can see there's no pinching here, and once again I can press 3 and I can select the spring geometry, Control C, N for new mesh item, Control V to paste, W to move, and we can move this. And finally, if you want to create a spiral from this geometry, you can just press 2 to go into edges mode, select these two edges, up arrow to grow the selection along the loop, or it's also known as selecting the next logical edge. And then with this edge selected, I'm going to rename this mesh. Well, actually, I'm not going to rename it anything. I'm just going to create a mesh op, and the type of mesh op I'm going to create is the edges to curves. So I'll double click that. The curve type is going to be B-spline curve, and then I will press 3 for polygons mode, and I will select this B-spline curve, Control C to copy, and then I'm actually going to press N for new mesh item, Control V to paste, and I will delete this procedural mesh item that we used to create the new B-spline. So here is our spiral, and now I can just press N for new mesh item, and I can call this new geo, and the spiral will be called a new curve. So new underscore curve, and within this new geo I'm just going to I could create another circular geometry, which I think I'll do actually. I'll come over to the basic vertical tab, control click on the cube. This time I won't bother making it circular. I'll just create a square kind of effect, but I do need it to be smaller, so we'll just scale that inwards, center selected all, and then with this new geo, I'll add the operator curve extrude, and this time we'll choose new curve as the path, and click OK. And it looks a little bit jumbled up right now, but I can just come over to the curve extrude and expand the tool pipe to get to the path segment generator. We'll just immediately bump this up to 128. And that looks pretty good, aside from the fact that it's flipped. So in the curve extrude mesh up properties, I'll just invert the polygons. And there we go. So I can come over to the new geo, 3 for polygons mode, make sure I'm in the base mesh, R for scale, and we can just scale that in, and then deselect the base mesh, Q to drop the scale tool, and this is what we have. So it's pretty cool. I hope this has been helpful. Stay tuned to Modo Geeks TV for more videos.